Hello, hello. Excellent. All right. Apologies there. My mic wasn't working for a hot second. Good evening, everybody. Welcome over from President Sunday stream, where I just was with you watching that. Anyway, it's another day for Cuffles. So we're just going to pick up where he was going to leave off. We're going to watch this. This is called Counterfire. This is from Counterpoints and Brianna Wu, where they want to set up their own, basically Crossfire show. If you remember, if you're old enough to remember from back in the early 2000s, there was a show on CNN called Crossfire, which is a debate show. And it lasted just about to the point where Jon Stewart had his say and got it shut down. Anyway, apparently they decided to talk about Osama bin Laden and TikTok and all that jazz, which you'll remember me and the commander, McMillan, talked about, if you're a regular viewer, the other night. So let's just get into this and see what heroically brave stance all of these people take against bin Laden on TikTok.
But blowing up the World Trade Center is probably the most principled and defensive thing he ever did, which is like, holy crap, that is a crazy thing to tweet. I invited her on the show tonight to argue about this with Connor and I, to which she responded by blocking me immediately. So I'm guessing that's a no. She doesn't want to come on the show.
She's riding the wave of attention and stupidity that's coming from people sympathizing with jihadism. Frankly, like I'm trying to be as tactful as I can right now, but I get really angry about it. Hassan cackling like a hyena when a female cop is shot by one of her partners. Are you okay? That thought process extrapolated out to tens of comments. But basically what we wanted to do, and beautiful lighting and green screens and all sorts of stuff as we develop the show. But basically what we wanted to do, as far as I understand it, is we wanted to have somebody who was a little bit more right-wing and a little bit more left-wing, but not totally insane, break down.
I'm just curious, which one of these is supposed to be left-wing?
Down the news stories of the week. And so we felt like that would be something good for humanity. So Brianna, do you want to introduce yourself to the people at home and maybe what your hopes are for the show?
100%. My name is Brianna Wu. Most people know me from Gamergate. That was 10 years ago. Life moves on. I've moved on. I am Special Projects Director at Progressive Victory. I'm Executive Director.
Actually, they might know you from your two failed congressional campaigns. They probably don't know you from your work as a PAC, because no one's supposed to know executive directors of political action committees.
Rebellion PAC. I'm a former candidate for United States Congress, and my job is to kind of get out there and put my political
and Counterpoints, for everyone who's not aware, is a Warhammer 40k conservative who doesn't understand that he's the butt of the joke.
Principles into action. You may look around these days and say to yourself, hey, America's got a few problems, right? And one of the things I've learned in the last 10 years is politics is really more about forming coalitions than it is about crafting the perfect academic, theory of how change works. So what I've found is people like Connor, in my view, I have more in common with Connor than I do some of the absolute fringe, in the sense like, Connor, you love your country, you love your family, you love democracy, and you want to go out there. We have different people we vote for sometimes. At the end of the day, we want a lot of the same things with policy. So I thought it would be an interesting conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's kind of the
boring.
Goal, is to maybe not agree with each other on everything from a policy perspective or a descriptive perspective, or who the good guy out because they touched grass for like 4 decades.
Personally, it's a blind spot in their analysis, is they assume everything is performative and nothing is quite real. I think there's a real cynicism for Gen Z that is it often gets in the way of their analysis.
Well, speaking of dramatic performativity, I think that's actually like a perfect segue into our first subject. You saw, I think everybody saw one of the most schizophrenic.
All right, who wants to take any bets at all whatsoever if Brianna Wu actually advances a policy proposal from this? She has a habit of doing this. She always pivots to talking about policy, right? She turns around and says, well, we have to focus on policy. And then she doesn't focus on policy. So, or she doesn't focus on policy in any kind of real sense. For example, after last night, they started talking about open borders, and open borders is obviously a issue of like considerable discussion around economy and smuggling interdiction, etc. But she just like, here's my Wikipedia article. This is a stupid idea. We have to focus on the DREAM Act instead. And the DREAM Act is a piece of legislation before the American Congress, which has sat there for some time, which would take individuals who were born here from families or were brought here when they were children, functionally as undocumented immigrants that don't have any papers or documentation, and make them citizens. And so like we have to focus on this instead of open borders, says Brianna Wu. Okay. But open borders is a fundamental part of the American Constitution. We have free and easy trade and access to travel between the states, specifically because we understood, or at least the founders understood, that the Constitution it cannot limit us in this way if we expect to be a functioning country. We can't have Virginians not letting people from Maryland in, etc., blah, etc., etc. Like the fundamental underpinning of what allows Congress to even legislate on the basis of immigration law is the Commerce Act. It's not the only one, to be sure. There are a number of portions of the Constitution that give Congress this authority, but the Commerce Act, which is functionally what open borders is designed to make work, is like the basic underpinning of this. You cannot throw away this concept and that is stupid without wanting to analyze it after you've taken a 3-second jaunt on Wikipedia.
Tweets in history, but it's kind of the it's the tip of the iceberg of a real discourse online about whether or not like jihadism was justified or bin Laden was justified. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go into the Discord. I'm going to share my screen. I'm going to go to this screen, go live on it. And you're going to have to forgive me on some of the tech boomerisms and all that kind of stuff as we figure out the format. But chat, I appreciate your patience. You should be used to my tech boomerisms by now. And do you want to read it, or do you want me to read it?
Yeah, I'll go for it. So this is from a lovely Twitter account called Scumbelievable, which is, good username. You picked a good one there. So the tweet can pretty safely state that bin Laden and I did not agree on much, but blowing up the World Trade Center is probably the most principled and defensive thing he ever did. Which is like, holy crap, that is a crazy thing to tweet. And, I invited her on the show tonight to argue about this with Connor and I.
Why? Okay. If the value of this show is going to be, we're going to talk about the issues of the day. Why would you pick this person? What does this person bring to the table? Let's take almost virtually anyone else who turns around and says that there are points of like the TikTok discourse was, hey, there are points of honest truth in this bin Laden letter. And like, do they know about Al-Qaeda? Probably not. And we talked about that on this stream, not this stream in particular, but the one I did prior. We talked about that on this show prior, that Osama bin Laden's hatred of America is primarily based around his hatred of Saudi Arabia, and that you have to filter it through that lens. But like, why would you talk to this person who's obviously taken the most extreme position you could possibly take, except as a methodology for you to sit here and try to look better? Like, this person is obviously not the most forthright and capable person on this matter.
To which she responded by blocking me immediately. So I'm guessing that's a no. She doesn't want to come.
So we're not even getting the person to come on the show? What's the point? Are you just going to see you two sit and circle jerk?
On the show and basically talk about this. So, I guess first thoughts on this before we get into her longer history of pure crazy.
My first thoughts are...
who is this person? This isn't about bin Laden Sims. This is... Oh my God. Why do we care? Could someone find the tweet for me, please? The original tweet, if you can, so I can just get a feeling of what's happening here.
Reading it again is that like... she's riding the wave of attention and stupidity that's coming from people sympathizing with jihadism. And there's this like South Park joke where they talk about like HIV/AIDS, and they talk about like when is it okay to joke about it, and then they have like the timeline, and it ends up being like 21.5 years is the exact time to joke about something horrible. And I can't help but think about that when 2001 was 22 years ago. And so as a result, the Zoomers they don't know the horror that my generation went through, and then enough like apathetic and
Osama bin Laden's principal objective and Al-Qaeda's principal objective is to create a pan-Islamist state. Specifically, they want to create a pan-Islamist state that is, it's Sunni. It's a Sunni pan-Islamist state. So, like, there's a big divide in modern Islam, or at least some factions of modernism, between Sunni and Shia, and it's about who is responsible for interpreting the word left by the Prophet Muhammad. Long story short, for our purposes in this particular discussion, Sunni and Shiite Muslims fight each other in multiple countries constantly. There are multiple groups, such as the Muslim Brotherhood, of which Hamas is an offshoot, that are proposing a global caliphate comprised of all Muslims. So, for example, if you go back and you read bin Laden's letter, and I know it was taken down, but there's a Twitter account that has it. I'll repost it tonight. If you read bin Laden's letter, he lists a long set of grievances. He talks about certain other issues, such as the Muslims in Chechnya. It's not just about America when he writes this particular letter. He is focusing on American Israel, but that's not really, that they are artifacts of that. And like Israel is a problem for pan-Islamists because they're kind of like a thorn in their side, kind of like a stick in their eye type thing.
Anti-American people are like, well, it's been 20 years, so screw it. I'll just say the most gross things I can possibly imagine. Whereas I still have flashbacks of people like watching people. I'm trying to be polite, but pass, like die on live television. That's my memory.
Yeah, or people like I was watching live and that guy leaped off the tower to try to save his life because he was burning to death. Right. And look.
Not to be that guy, but he wasn't trying to save his life. Let's be perfectly clear. Most people are not silly enough to think that falling from a 100-and-something foot tower is going to save your life. That was what they were doing. They were ending their life. It was horrifying. The day was horrific for everyone who lived through it. But speak of it honestly.
I made a decision before we started the show. I was going to be real on it. I'm not going to give you politician Brianna talk, which I'm sure will bite me in the ass at some point. But look, I'm going to tell you the truth.
Are you sure that's directionally a good idea, Brianna?
Which is, I occasionally laugh at some of the 9/11 content online. My good friend Keffels has a meme that's out there of her firing a gun, and someone has merged it with the Twin Towers being hit. And look, it's horrific, but it's funny, and I laugh at that every single time. I'm not sitting here like serious State Department person and telling you like none of this irreverence is ever funny, okay? But this is not a joke. This is not a like trying to be provocative. This person is tying into another story we're going to talk about, which is a whole bunch of people on TikTok looking at bin Laden's letter to the United States and saying, hey, I agree with that. And this person is like going, the most anti-establishment, America sucks take I can possibly give you is that bin Laden I agreed with here, right? So this is just her going to the most extreme take. And I'm going to say it, man. This is privilege. This person is a writer. They don't serve in the military. They are not a police officer. They're not going to have to clean up any of the problems of the violence they are inciting. And it's just, it is the ultimate thing that someone in the nice comfort of Massachusetts.
Who's inciting violence? Look, I get pushing back on this. Again, we covered all of this already. I would invite you to go watch that particular VOD. It's up 2 down from the top on the channel. But like, people have this reaction all the time. A whole bunch of people suddenly, for example, in my generation, high school, we were taught for a little bit of time out of Howard Zinn's A People's History of the United States. And this is a radically different historical take on America than you were traditionally taught in an American history textbook. People feel lied to, and they feel upset and hurt when that happens. It's natural to have a position like this. I don't necessarily think that it's natural to I don't necessarily think it's natural to keep that. If you keep learning about history, you start to come to understand better America's place in the world. But like, it's not an unnatural position to have when you're addressing the dissonance between what you were taught and what you've been told about your country and what is the reality.
This living in Worcester, with our lovely, lovely, like high taxes and good social safety net here. This is the kind of thing you can only tweet when you don't live in a war zone, right? So just absolute privilege, man.
Yeah, and so for me, I think reading her next tweet, which we'll do in a second, which was like her apology or whatever. I think the analysis that it's privilege is dead on, but I also think that what's kind of going on here is that these people have not touched the muddy and bloody world ever. And so as a result, they can watch a few clips from 9/11 where you see the jumper, which is a man who's leaping to his death in order to avoid fire. You can see the plane smack into the buildings 10,000 times until you're desensitized. You can watch the fireballs. You can watch the firemen and the cops running towards the buildings in order to get people out and realize that most of those people basically didn't make it out. You can look at all that kind of stuff and you can kind of like you can push it away emotionally because you haven't encountered that kind of thing in your life. But I think that a lot of people who are first responders or doctors or nurses or anything like that, when they experience that kind of trauma where they watch somebody severely injured or pass on, they take that and they extrapolate it to the horror of real world events. And so as a result, you're basically like, some of this stuff can be funny, but when you're being cruel.
Okay. It seems unnecessarily unfair. Plenty of people have empathy, are able to feel empathy for others without necessarily experiencing the thing itself, simply by relating it to a thing they themselves have experienced. You do not have to necessarily have been in that position of a first responder or military personnel to know 9/11 was bad. There are unique considerations to those jobs socially, certainly, but that doesn't leave you with like most people understood intuitively that 9/11 was bad. And so far as like who laughs at dark humor the most, nurses, doctors, police officers, firefighters, EMS workers, soldiers, they're the biggest crowd of dark humor people you'll ever meet.
Just to be cruel. And we're also talking about in the wake of 10/7, you're basically taking an emotional knife and jamming it into people's hearts and then laughing as you twist it. And that's the kind of cruelty that we've seen for, I don't know, at least the past month.
So I've always wanted to ask you this, like something you told me in private, and I hope I can say it on the air, is like one of the reasons you left being a cop is it wasn't enough money to wrestle crackheads to the ground every single night. Like you've been out there as just a normal person, like just trying to keep your community safe and orderly and like deal with stuff like this. Like, what is the human cost of like dealing with violence day in and day out? Because this person we know is not going to have to deal with that. Like, what is that like for you? Can you humanize that to people?
Yeah, I think for my experience, it's probably taken until even tonight to process some of the traumas that I've been through. And the way that I deal with it is I actually, a lot of people just cover it up. They just, they drink, they do pills, they ignore their own trauma. They work so hard that they don't have to relive some of the worst aspects of their life. I'm Irish, so I love misery. So I just love sifting through all my trauma. So what it really,
because the Irish aren't known for drinking ever.
takes in order to dig through that kind of stuff is a lot of contemplation about mortality and pain and empathy, and then also having unsolvable problems and ghosts. Like, I'm not trying to be like too dramatic here, but there were things like, not to be too graphic, but there was an animal that was shot and was deeply injured, and the family couldn't afford to fix it, and I gave them a few $100s to try to encourage them to take it to the vet. But as far as I know, the injury was probably so grievous that
All right, let's move on. This is totally irrelevant to the task at hand.
Mentally lost part of your humanity. And I think that's why, on the left, I've really gotten a lot more aggressive about calling this stuff out. I think it's a cancer of our movement. I think it undermines all.
It does nothing at all. No serious American politician was running around going, Osama bin Laden, good.
All of our moral authority. And I got into the left. I know you and I have a difference of opinion about the role government should play in our lives, but I got into the left because I think the government has a role to play in healthcare, like infrastructure, hospitals, schools, that kind of stuff, right? I didn't get into it to like advocate for bin Laden, coming and destroying my own country. And I just want to I just want to throw him into the sea. So
thank you for that brave stance against Osama bin Laden.
No, it's actually kind of funny because the reason why I was laughing, even though we're talking about dour things, is one, Willie Max show. So that's one of the things that we'll be talking about tonight. But Willie Max show did a video piece. He did two of them. One of them's an hour. One of them's like 30 minutes. And it's basically just a takedown. He's not a geopolitical analysis, but a takedown of Hassan Piker. And one of the clips that he plays in the early-ish stage of his 30-minute video, and also at the end, is Hassan cackling like a hyena when a female cop is shot by one of her partners.
Are you okay?
Okay, but let's be real. I was looking at police shooting stats a while back it was almost certainly 2020, and for some reason, probably because of the protests around that time. And there was a period of time where the NYPD had absolutely no officer-involved shootings that weren't caused by another officer. It happens a lot, and it speaks to the professionalism of the police force. Like, these guys unload a ridiculous amount of rounds in crowded areas. There was another story I remember of NYPD officers unloading 72 rounds at a fleeing suspect in the middle of New York. You're amazing you didn't hit anybody.
Now, the female cop lived, and I get it. You don't view these people as people because they're arms of the institution and all that kind of stuff. But I think about that thought process extrapolated out to tens of thousands of young people where they're like, police can be murdered, and it's funny. It's funny when they die. And for me, that's such a disgusting thing that you're saying that you want to push some of these people into the sea. My vote is that when society collapses, we actually we take all the Cubans who want to come here and we deport all of these people to Cuba. That's my solution. Vosh talks about Coconut Island. I want to make this literal.
Okay. All right. Yeah, let's look for something more substantive.
I think writing something that felt like giving an anecdote about how you realized that was wrong and hurtful, like going into specifics about how it can hurt people, how you plan to do better. I think it reads like ChatGPT wrote it, to be honest with you. So not great in my view.
All right. Well, my opinion on it is it could be heartfelt, but much like we'll explore later in the show, the apology doesn't matter if the pattern of behavior continues. And so if your pattern is like you get homicidal on social media, which we've all been there, like I've been homicidal on social media, but then you engage in ways for negative attention, and then you just do it 6 months later and you say some of the worst, most evil that's ever been uttered on social media ever, to the point that we're talking about it, then maybe you need to
that criteria of where it's saying you said the most evil thing ever, that so that we're talking about it isn't exactly the banger you think it is. Like, you're just picking up fruit off the ground at this point.
touch some grass, take some pills, relax, like go do something else.
She has another tweet where she's talking about needing to go take a bunch of benzos and lay down for the day. So maybe that's a good idea.
Yeah. That's not too many benzos, but the right amount of benzos. So that kind of
speech is more speech, but I do think we needed an honest conversation. Like, you can't defeat your enemies if you don't understand why they're attacking you, right? So I really wish that The Guardian had left this up, let people read it so it doesn't seem like it's like hidden knowledge that's being kept from you, and had done like stories like really examining what the reasons were to kind of educate this generation that seems to not understand it. How do you kind of feel about that?
Yeah, I kind of wonder if that's the challenge of politics and media in general, because like I do kind of think that there's a power. So for instance, like, you know, on a good stream night, I'll break between, 80 and 150 people live. We'll get a few thousand viewers in the after show. Of course, like, we have to dedicate our energy to, being consistent. That's one of the most important things with creating content. But it seems like some of the wildest, most popular creators, I'll name drop, but Hassan Piker, Ludwig, Pokimane, all those mainstream Twitch and YouTube creators, they are kind of built for not the least common denominator, but the average common denominator. And so,
as opposed to this show, which is definitely built around the least common denominator.
As a result, I'm not surprised.
Right, kind of a dark view about the United States military kind of being a tool to secure resources around the world. And it wasn't that I don't disagree with a lot of that, but do you think a lot of people, like with your experience, come to that conclusion, and the fact that it is kind of black and white when you get in and then you get out and it's more gray? Does that kind of change a lot of people? Was it an experience unique to you?
No, 100%. And and the reason why, obviously different people have different levels of consideration, and not every 100 IQ normie grunt is going to have, like, just because they go to Okinawa or go to Iraq doesn't mean that they're like a student of geopolitical history, right? But what happens is they kind of see.
That's definitely true. Like that attitude annoys me a lot when you're like, oh yeah, I served, and like, okay, respect for you, but that doesn't make you an expert in anything except the thing with what you did when you were serving.
I don't want to say corruption, because corruption is like too intentional. They see like the incompetence of the American war machine, and they see like the broad supply chains, and they see like Burger Kings in Kuwait and Iraq, and they see like officers like sneaking liquor in with the contractors while the enlisted people have to like live out of tents and all that kind of stuff. And so they kind of see like the human frailties of the ideals that they go to war for. And then if you see some of your friends die, or if you end up killing people, then that's like a lot of emotional trauma. And so you have to ask yourself, like, is killing other human beings worth whatever we're allegedly fighting for? And is the American project worth dying for? And so a lot of people, their answer, when they actually see blood and guts and mud up close, their answer is no, because that thing is so horrible that they couldn't imagine something that would be worth doing that to another human being, or having it done to them. They can't imagine something worth fighting for that's deep.
We do a bad job, and I mean we generally, as in historians, political scientists, etc., do a bad job, and I've talked about this, illuminating the benefits of the rules-based international order. As a rule, we know that getting involved in small conflicts will keep them small before they become bigger. We also know that if we ignore conflicts, they get bigger. they become more. Rwanda's a great example. We don't do a good job elucidating that. We don't do a good job talking to soldiers about that. Now, I will fully cop to the concept of Iraq, and probably broadly much of the war on terror being not worth it, is particularly the parts in Africa which have fed that beast much more effectively. I will talk to things like allying with a country like Israel as definitely being antithetical to that ideal. But to have that discussion, you have to have the first discussion. What are you doing? How is it affecting the world? And it's not a one-shot discussion. It is a very large and complex issue. It's economic, it's political, it's military, it's diplomatic. There are a lot of things that go into that discussion. And like having that particular that discussion and delivering that education is a morale building issue for soldiers, but more importantly for the American voting public. It's important to understand, like, valid question, why should my money go to Ukraine? Because a little bit of money now will save a lot of money in the end. Having that discussion is important.
But there's also, I would say, a warrior class that I think is present in every society. And they're just men who are built for conflict. So if you give them an ideology, if you give them physical fitness training, if you give them weapons and all that kind of stuff, they will happily fight those wars. And in that class of people, I kind of found like a binary split. I found people who, because they had killed and died for America, or their friends had died for America, they were still bought into the narrative. America is the best country in the world. We fight for the right reasons. World War II, we saved the Jews. Not really. But, you know, we did all the right things as best we could, and all of our enemies suck. And then I saw another cast, which I was infinitely more fascinated with. I'll try to wrap this up. But one of the casts that I saw in at least two of my really good friends when they came home is they realized that you have people like that fucking Twitter person. And they're like, and they're citizens with that person. And they see Miley Cyrus on stage with a fucking dildo, like, you know, doing
Daniel Bessner. I have not seen Daniel Bessner's Ukraine takes.
Like weird debaucherous.
If you want, leave it for me somewhere in the cathedral or my Discord.
Sex shit, and it's like promoted on MTV. And they're like, holy shit, why am I fighting for like a debaucherous, alcoholic, like Funko Pop consuming, soulless sex cult when the people that...
Yep, the Funko Pops are definitely the problem.
Killing are principled warriors who have the balls to fight for something and try to kill me and die. And so these people who I'm utterly fascinated with them, they end up through like bitterness with the American Republic as it currently exists. They end up liking and respecting the people they used to kill. It's absolutely psychotic, but it's beautiful.
It's crazy.
It's not uncommon. A lot of American soldiers came to respect the Germans, irrespective of what they did in World War II, particularly American soldiers who were not necessarily exposed to any of the camps.
I want to do a longer show.
There are very few people who aren't anti-war, even in a sense. It's not a question of being pro-war, usually. It's a question of arguing over the necessity of a given war.
On this sometime. Oh my gosh. Can I give you just super briefly, because I want to get to the letter. But I feel like I had kind of an opposite trajectory than you, because I came from, when I was in my 20s, I was a Noam Chomsky reading, radical, like the same way a lot of these people were. Though I never praised bin Laden, my God, because I never suffered a head injury like that. But one of the things that really...
I wouldn't necessarily agree with that. You're definitely a transmed, a liar, terminally obsessed with image. Like, you're still 20 in that way.
It kind of white pilled me on the United States and kind of seeing this as a country of values worth fighting for. is just getting further and further in my career and getting to know more and more people that like work in government and work in institutions. And I mean, I'm obviously talking like the cops in your town, you know, often they're really good people. They're just trying to serve your community the best way they can. But I'm even talking at the State Department. Like, you know, once I started making friends at the State Department, like professionals that go get a master's degree and they're genuinely like looking at humanitarian crises, trying to secure funding for it and like get resources out to help crises around the world, or seeing like getting to know just people working in the mid-level of government and agencies that are completely taken for granted, like not having the resources to do their job and not particularly being paid well enough for it, but like understanding that the country doesn't function if people can't get their social security check. So I think one of the things that's really changed my view on this is like the older you get, the more you understand about how the country actually works. And like our court system, there's a lot there we're fighting for with a lot of our policy around the world and our ideals. I think there are things we're fighting for. So I think whereas you've gotten maybe a little bit more jaded as you've gotten older, I've gone the other way. And maybe it's just because of the battlefields I fight in. I don't know.
Yeah, it's wild that you say that because I was actually heartened by the testimony of the attorney generals against Trump, and I was heartened by the IRS whistleblowers, and I was heartened by I'm trying to think of the other guy's name who ran it. But basically, it's like these people, at least my perception, is like they're passionate, they have a servant mindset. They care about principles. They fail in those principles, but they still strive towards those ideals. And I was thinking to myself, it's like, I'm such a jaded asshole. And like these people somehow, because they're believers, they were able to keep their like sense of like principle and integrity together.
There are a lot of people who do that though. Like that's the argument I would constantly make across the world, is there are more people who are interested in the well-being of others than not. You will hear about horrifying things every day because they want you to hear about horrifying things, because you will lap it up, because that's what sells media. That's what sells the news. But there are plenty of people who are quietly doing whatever good they can for as long as they can. And that's what matters. Like, this is not necessarily a unique take. I think it's easy to go into that space where you go, oh no, I cannot, that's not fair, insomnia. Serving mindset equal cannon fodder. That's not fair. There are plenty of people, who serve as in bureaucratic positions throughout the United States government. For example, FEMA, who don't ever get shot at or killed. There are plenty of people who dedicate their lives to public service, who dedicate their lives to doing good. Like, muster some kindness, a little bit of empathy.
For 20 whole years of a career, which is impressive, by the way. And somehow they didn't allow that to embitter them. So I was like, man, maybe I'm mentally weak. But the one of the things that I think this happens with grunts a lot of people who are on the front end of the delivery of humanitarian relief and aid and security services and all that kind of stuff. When you're high up, when you're in the I would say in the military, in the officer sphere, when you're in the State Department, which I think is entirely like that would be the officer's sphere, there's a lot of like technocratic calculations about how resources get distributed and how people are going to execute jobs. Some of those are good ideas, and some of them are completely disconnected from the reality on the ground. And then also, even I'm sure there's like the State Department equivalent of grunts. I'm sure that they get frustrated when their decision about where medical services go, or where water projects go, or where food projects or dental.
Yeah, but like I don't want people like Brianna Wu deciding that either. Like, is everyone who does the job good? No, of course not. But this is an opinion that is not unique to any soldier in every campaign in history. Is the gods must be crazy? Not at all. Is this a unique opinion? If you ever want to get a really good understanding of the mindset of a serving soldier, there's a book called The Warriors, Reflections on Men in Battle by Glenn Gray. And Glenn Gray was a philosophy student who was drafted in World War II. And he spent a great deal of time writing memoirs and notes during the conflict itself. And he rose through a rank of enlisted soldiers to an officer, actually. And then he put it all together in a fantastic book. I would imagine that he's not insomnia. A lot of enlisted soldiers do not like officers to begin with, particularly like there's also like some officers don't like other officers. It's quite the thing. Like you if you watch me and the commander talk sometimes, well, I'll make a snotty reference about field grade officers, which is majors, lieutenant colonels, and colonels. That's just entirely my bias about certain people I've had to deal with over the years. Like that's just that.
Relief or medical relief go is literally determining whether or not people live or die. And if they're field people, then they might have shaken the hands of like the village leaders and occupied it for more than 50 years, overflowing with oppression, tyranny, crimes, killing, expulsion, destruction, and devastation. Of course, is Israel could just disband its military. They could give up their arms. They could erase their borders. While seeking Allah's help, we form our reply based on two questions. Why are we fighting and opposing you? And question two, what are we calling you to? And what do we want you to, or what do we want from you? As
they're reading the Bin Laden letter.
From the first question, why are we fighting and opposing you? The answer is very simple. Because you attacked us and continue to attack us. Anything to add?
Let's keep going.
Well, if you're going to make the graphic insomnia, you might as well use it.
Okay. A, you attacked us in Palestine. Palestine, which has sunk under military occupation for more than 80 years, the British handed over Palestine with your help and your support to the Jews, who have occupied it for more than 50 years, overflowing with oppression, tyranny, crimes, killing, expulsion, destruction, and devastation. The creation and continuation of Israel is one of the greatest crimes, and you are the leaders of its criminals. And of course, there is no need to explain and prove the degree of American support for Israel. The creation of Israel is a crime which must be erased. Each and every person whose hands have become polluted in the contribution towards this crime must pay its price and pay for it heavily. Anything?
Kind of Holocausty, a little bit Holocausty there.
Well, okay, but here's the thing, though. What we could do, because this is what I saw leftists on Twitter suggest, is Israel could just disband its military. They could give up their arms. They could erase their borders. They could let all the Palestinians have a right to return. And then what's going to happen, it's not going to be a mass slaughter or rape or murder or suicide bombs or pogroms or anything like that. What's going to happen instead is Arab Muslims of the Palestinian people will be so convinced by left-wing progressive ideals that they will institute a secular society that treats.
That's a lot of straw. That's an awful lot of straw that was shoveled into that. Do you ever wonder if fighting the Cold War was worth it? Even if the USSR still existed, was it really worth all the people the CIA got killed? Well, let's kind of reel that one in and lay it out for a little bit. A lot of people do die from American intervention in the Cold War, but a lot of people die from Soviet intervention in the Cold War. North Korea invades South Korea after border skirmishes, and a whole bunch of people die. Do you imagine for a moment that North Korea is a better steward of the Korean Peninsula than South Korea? Is South Korea perfect? No. South Korea is a country with a lot of problems. But do you imagine that your life, if you were a Korean living on the Korean Peninsula, do you imagine that that would be better? You cannot. I don't want to sit here and say that every move made in the Cold War was a right one, because that's not it. But the idea, I think we need to abandon forever the idea that the Soviet Union was not an imperialist state at the end of the day. Yes, that's what he did. He found the worst possible takes and said this is the left's position. No, the Cold War costs a great deal for us as a society. It shapes us immeasurably. But at the same time, the idea that you set up an international rules-based order for and that you enforce it is that you try to stop. The alternative is a conflict that turns into a world war. So it's a battle you have to pick. What do I do now, tiny, that's kind of shitty, that stops an apocalypse? If the North was in charge, we'd get rid of K-pop. No, we just hear the incessant screamings of the Korean citizens as they are put to work in labor camps instead.
Everyone fairly, regardless of ethnic background or religion. So how does that solution strike you?
I don't think it's realistic. I mean, I obviously want to be careful.
It's not a position anyone serious is taking.
I'll just point out that Bin Laden's point of view is not necessarily the Palestinian point of view. I do think that what you're reading here is people that want a state based on Islam.
Really, the man who wrote the letter's point of view is the point of view whose it is, and it's not someone else's?
And kind of the mindset of that. What's really of note here is it's right here. Like the creation and continuation of Israel is one of the greatest crimes. Really? The greatest crimes. That's.
I want to point out what's happening here so that no one is really in the dark. What we have is a person who is taking a piece of propaganda, hyperbolic propaganda, and trying to argue about its seriousness. On a show where you started off with a tweet of someone being hyperbolic, like maybe put this in the right context. Understand what Al-Qaeda is doing, absolutely. But this is ridiculous. I mean, this is actually ridiculous. Like, no one is thinking that Osama bin Laden thinks Israel is okay. So 9/11 happens, and then Al Qaeda is in Afghanistan, and we attack Afghanistan, and then we spend the next 20 years humping around in the desert in Afghanistan trying to build a country and hunting Al Qaeda. All for nothing, incidentally. Al Qaeda's back. That went well. Thanks, Trump and Biden. Good job. Well done. Anyway. There's better ways to do this. Like, this is not the best discourse that's happening. Why would we do this? Why would you do this? Except if you wanted to try to make yourself look good at the expense of an unserious person, which is a mark of you yourself being unserious.
Like, it doesn't feel like this. When I read this, it makes it really apparent to me why people in Israel might feel like they need a really, really strong border and, a really strong national security policy to address people with this mindset.
Which I could go on 3 tangents from that, but I'm going to resist the urge just because we're going to have...
thank you.
Give me the bottom line.
Well, the bottom line is, I think a lot of people, including Elon Musk and Candace Owens, have been effectively asking the Jewish question in public, and they've just been like,
I agree.
Why are Jews disproportionately represented in sectors of wealth and power? Why are they contributing to these progressive worldviews? Why are they contributing to these progressive colleges? And of course, like, these are generalizations, but then I sympathize. I've read a few historical books of Jewish folk who basically said, like, you wonder why we seek power and influence. You wonder why we try to, basically make ourselves integral to society. It's because every 30 or 40 years, everybody tries to kill us. So wouldn't you try to make yourself integrated and valuable to society if every 40 years somebody tries to wipe you off the planet? So I find that.
No, I don't think there's you immigrate to America in the 40s, the 50s, and the thing to do is to establish yourself, to make money, to get a house, to try to set up your own business. Like, the idea is to try to climb that ladder. The only thing that Jewish people are doing is climbing a ladder, the same as anyone else. I don't necessarily, I think it's wrong to single them out. like this. In any case, like they make themselves, and everyone tries to make themselves integral to society. It's not a unique position. Italians had to do this because Italian Americans, when they started coming over, were subject to incredibly harsh racist views. Irishmen, same thing. If you read American history, at least American immigration history, you start to understand this in two waves. You get unique waves of certain groups, and then people hate those groups because they're new. I've kind of stepped away from using fascist a lot and talking about American politics because a much more apt term is nativist. We are very nativist about integration and assimilation, and that makes a big difference, I think, in understanding America. Is that what we do is we get scared of things, and we react horrifyingly to things, people, new situations. Like there's never been, for example, the substance of the pogroms of Eastern Europe in America. So like that's not necessarily the thing. And like I don't want to essentialize people like that. Like Jewish people are people. They want to live their regular lives. They want to do things. They want good things for themselves and their families. They want good things for their friends. So they work to make those things happen. That's what's happening. Like this is like a really weirdly like kind of take. Like, like it makes my skin crawl. Like it's so patronizingly anti-Semitic.
Reasoning compelling. And also,
I agree.
Yeah, sorry, one more half tangent. I promise I'll reel it back in. The Jewish control of media should, if it was actually real, should have done an infinitely better job of like stopping the criticism of Israel and Jews. And I am not seeing.
To be fair, some of the most egregious violations of the First Amendment have been passed on behalf of Israel. Thank you. Oh, yes. Oh, okay. Well, you're welcome. Some of the most egregious violations of the First Amendment have been passed on behalf of Israel, like the boycotting of Israel goods, for example. Like I think, what is it? Like something like 20 or 30 states don't let you do that. Oh. You might want to read a few more books, Connor.
Any of that. Like 15, nope. 1,500% or 1,000% or 500% overrepresentation of Jews in media has done nothing to stop the wave of like criticism of Israel and just general, frankly, anti-Semitism that I've seen.
I've always interpreted this, and oh God, this is probably going to get clipped and shipped and used against me. But, when I am married to Frank, like growing up in Mississippi, I got to know Frank's family, and through that, a lot of Chinese people, right? Yeah, I got to tell you, Frank and all the Chinese people I've met that immigrated to the United States do not take things for granted the way, frankly, a lot of white people do, right? Like Frank was just raised to think he's got to work harder, he's got to go to school harder, he's got to know more, he's got to excel. Is just drilled into him, right? And I think that mindset, in my experience, has been true for a lot of people that are outsiders in many capacities, right? Mm-hmm. I think the women in the game industry.
That's not going to get clipped. That's a relatively benign statement. What is that nativist fear born out of then? Is it just unprompted? There's a lot of things that end up happening. It's a very easy thing to manipulate. So, for example, for much of American history, the port of entry for most people is going to be New York and Ellis Island. So what ends up happening is a ship comes in and a whole bunch of people come off the ship who now need jobs, who can be exploited and worked for free, for very cheaply. I mean, so they get the jobs above people who have been in New York who are struggling, etc. And this kind of filters down as an attitude. So it's a displacement. More people coming in displace people otherwise because they are more exploitable. That's the principal idea around undocumented immigration today is that undocumented immigration is fundamental to an American economy in a certain sense, particularly agriculture, because they can be underpaid to do backbreaking work that no one does. Because I don't know about you, but I've never seen an American citizen lining up to go and pick avocados or fruit or what have you in like the middle of harvest season. And the other one in America, at least, is the restaurant industry. If you've worked in restaurants at all, you'll know that an awful lot of people in the back of the house are undocumented, being paid under the table, being paid a lot less, a substantial amount less, sometimes getting their wages cut in half than they might be if they were citizens and much more secure and able to report things like that. Immigration is tough because we want immigration to happen, and like obviously you guys in Europe have a pretty good system, at least in the Schengen zones. You can move through, and it hasn't resulted in everybody basically piling into Germany and France. So obviously something's going right. What happens when immigration is more open and more free is that you get a much greater exchange of goods and people going back and forth. What used to happen when the border with Mexico was not nearly as tightly controlled, and we weren't as draconian about our immigration laws, is people come here, they work seasonally, they go back. And it was an industry. They come, they make a good amount of money and go back. Immigrant areas started to be treated differently as the border moved. Not everybody had the money to go west. So, like, it took a long time. And if you look at property densillation maps out here in the West in the United States, it's still not that densely populated. Here in Colorado, some of that stuff that was said that was anti-Zionist in the entertainment industry was a little bit, but a lot of it is Israel has an awful lot of public support. Palestinian viewpoints aren't really well known or widely regarded. They are simply viewed as terrorists, and it's a very easy comparison to make after 9/11 for American citizens who were never that well connected with Israel in the first place, except as a place over there where all their money went to. But now that we've spent 20 years in Iraq and Afghanistan and Africa, Islamist is terrorist to us. It's not true. There are millions of Muslims who are Islamist who aren't. There are billions worldwide of Muslims who are just going about their day. But we sympathize with Israel. We do not with the Middle East as a whole. Yeah, there's the whole, getting back to that, there's not a whole lot of people living out here out west. One of the bigger concentrations is here in Colorado, and it's basically around 4 or 5 big areas. And then everywhere else is really sparsely populated. That's why when you see conservatives putting up electoral maps going, look at all this red, and it's just counties that voted for Trump. It's like, yeah, but no one lives there. All the places that are blue or purple are where people live.
It can push past the bullshit, and like last tend to be better game developers. And I have no doubt that's true for Jewish people too. So there's
Yeah, you weren't a very good game developer. Let's just put that out there. You failed at that too.
some like overrepresentation at the top. I think it's probably because they've, certain cultures are attracted to certain industries, right?
It's actually really nasty when it's like unleavened. Those dudes ended up being slaves in Egypt and now they're fucking stuck. So when you look at the defensive.
This is neither here nor there, but there is no archaeological evidence to suggest that the Israelites were ever enslaved in Egypt. Actually, this is here. Much of the Bible is a very wonderful piece of story that is several parts archaeology and history, but also embellishment. We don't talk about the people in the foothills of Colorado, Palm Dad. They don't exist. We just try to ignore them. Nothing past Boulder exists. That's Lauren Boebert country.
of Jewish people, I think that all you really have to do is point out at the past month and ask whether or not that defensiveness is justified. And
no, real talk. I have been on teams before, and sometimes people make comments, and I've respected it, but I've thought in the back of my mind, like, is that really real?
Brianna Wu is not her maiden name. It is her husband's last name, I do believe.
Is that really something you have to worry about? And it's like, after the last couple of weeks, it's like, yeah, it's real, and I was completely wrong there.
I get it. You live in Canada. People are shooting into unoccupied Jewish schools in the middle of the night. People are spray painting Stars of David on the sides of your business, and like all that kind of stuff. And there's all sorts of different kinds of Jews, and they're not all Zionists. So what the fuck?
How about the way the entire progressive movement has just turned on Jewish people? The
entire progressive movement has not turned on Jewish people. With this ridiculous statement, I'm going to take the dog, Avery the history dog, out real quick. We will be back in about 5 to 6 minutes. All right, we are back. Apologies about that. But if you've seen Avery the History Dog, you know he's adorable, so he cannot be ignored for long. All right, let's carry on.
Piece in the Times, I have a really good friend of mine, Ariella, who I reached out to see how she was doing with all this horror. And she sent me this article back saying, thanks for checking up on me. It's been really hard. And it's this piece talking about, like progressive Jews. And they're like, look, from our point of view, we've studied with trans people and fat people and black people and, all these causes. And, now it's like, we're the enemy. We're like, no one's standing with us. They feel really betrayed,
I have a tangent there, but I'm going to put a pin in that for the Elon Musk tweet because I think that's going to bring all of that home. Let's
get back to the letter. Yes,
of course. It brings us both laughter and tears.
At least Elon Musk actually has an opportunity to influence policy with his dwindling fortune, I would point out. He's lost so much money on Twitter that he might actually have to take out a loan.
See that you have not yet tired of repeating your fabricated lies that the Jews have a historical right to Palestine as it was promised to them in the Torah. Anyone who disputes with them on this alleged fact is accused of anti-Semitism. This is one of the most fallacious, widely circulated fabrications in history. The people of Palestine are pure Arabs and original Semites. It is the Muslims who are the inheritors of Moses, peace be upon him, and the inheritors of the real Torah that has not been changed. Muslims believe in all of the prophets, including...
Why are we getting technical difficulty screens at these points?
Abraham, Moses, Jesus, and Muhammad, peace be upon him, or Allah be upon them all. If the followers of Moses have been promised a right to Palestine in the Torah, then the Muslims are the most worthy nation of this. I have notes, but I'll read the next paragraph. When the Muslims conquered Palestine and drove out the Romans, Palestine and Jerusalem returned to Islam, the religion of all the prophets, peace be upon them. Therefore, the call to a historical right to Palestine cannot be raised against the Islamic Ummah that believes in all the prophets of Allah, peace be upon them, and blessings be upon them, and we make no distinctions between them. I've studied this, so I have a little bit of a rant. Do you want to go first?
Okay. Neither historical kingdom gives you a claim on the current territory. That's not how that works.
No, go ahead, please.
Okay. So my understanding, happy to be corrected by any Muslim at any point, is that Islam views monotheism as like the default perspective of humanity. And therefore, monotheists who pre-existed Christ, who pre-existed Abraham, who pre-existed all that kind of stuff, they were actually Muslims. It's actually like the state of nature of human beings. And so Judaism, as far as I understand it, is an insular religion. It believes that only the Jews are God's chosen people, and as a result, they have this history, etc. Plenty of Jews are not literalists, but they still identify with the religious and ethnic history that they've inherited. Because let's face it, if you look at their history and their biblical scripts, you can understand why they have main character syndrome. I get it.
Right.
So, so Jews have main character syndrome. But what happens with, I'll try to keep this brief, but
it's actually a really fascinating interchange of culture. The Jewish faith is an outgrowing of the people of a tribe of Canaanites, who are the name that has been given to the inhabitants of, well, we call it Israel today. Palestine depends on the point of history you're talking about. This is a land that is situated between Anatolia, Egypt, and Mesopotamia. It is a crossroads there for huge armies that are much better, from countries much better situated, states that are much better situated, to build massive armies and conquer them. So Egypt is, for example, a very long-standing historic controller in the Bronze Age of the land of Canaan, and like a not insignificant portion of the history of the Canaanites involves fighting the Egyptians. I made a reference on President Sunday's stream the other night to the Battle of Megiddo in the 1400s BCE. This is a battle. This is the first battle in military history that we have reliable details on. So it is traditionally held up as the first battle that we know about, like details on like a clash of men. It's assumed about 20,000. The Egyptians beat the Canaanites decisively, and they run into the city of Megiddo and hide. Significant only in that it's the first. But there's a period of time where one of these tribes of Canaanites travels. Brooks, I have a door in the background when I use my camera. Make an exception. There's a period of time called the Babylonian captivity of the Jewish people. And while they're out there, they're introduced to Zoroastrianism. And Zoroastrianism is a really unique faith among the ancient world, because it isn't really, you have like the Canaanites who are polytheistic, and they had all these gods like Yahweh and Baal. And you don't like me either. Well, I'll fine. I'm taking back my friendship bracelet, Brooks. Anyway, Zoroastrianism holds a dualist view of the world. Like there's good and evil, and there's a good God and an evil God. And like I said, and I'm really simplifying it. It's actually really fascinating. Go read about it. And they got really cool iconography too. Anyway, they get exposed to this, and they come back, and they start developing a monotheistic perspective over time. But like these people, Semitic language speakers and Canaanites, are woven throughout history a lot. You hear about them in school a lot too, outside of the context of the Israelites. Like you hear about the Phoenicians, for example. These are a Semitic speaking people from that area. Extension of that is the Carthaginians, who are also a Phoenician people who settle in North Africa and modern day Libya and Algeria. So like this is an incredibly rich history, right? It obviously, I've gone on a tangent about history, but that's my thing. But like one of the things I've always found fascinating about Carthage, for example, is Carthage has a deity that's called Baal, right? Baal, and you might know him best from Diablo 2, obviously, but also it's a demon in Christian and Jewish belief, like in Christian and Jewish demonology. The demons that they cite and that they name are gods in other cultures. They were gods of the Jews before they were monotheistic. It's a really fascinating evolution. Like syncretism is really interesting in how we get combined faiths and ideas to get new ones. It's a lot of fun to trace that back. We did one night in the cathedral. We watched a movie that was tangentially related to that, and it was great. We sat there and we kind of traced back a set of beliefs for a while. It was good fun.
But Christians are heretics to both Jews and Muslims because they believe in the Trinity. They don't just believe that Jesus was a prophet. They believe that he was a divine incarnation, which Muslims and Jews do not believe. So Christians are effectively heretics for both of those faiths. And then when it comes to Muslims, Jews are a closed monotheistic faith, whereas Islam is an open monotheistic faith. And as far as I can tell, they believe that the world will not know peace until everybody believes in the one true God. And they have a universalist religion, which is part of the reason why they exist from Morocco to Malaysia. And they have no problems with converts. They love converts. It's fantastic. And
no, sorry, Insomnia. That was what I was trying to get across, is that Baal was a Semitic god, and then he became a demon in the Christian and Jewish faith later.
Basically, in the ordained...
The coolest of the system lords was Sokar, Brooks, because he only plagued us for 2 episodes. Like, Baal got campy towards the end, let's be perfectly honest. Like the episode where there's like 20 of them in a room.
Correct world, Muslims would run everything. Pagans would not exist. Atheists would not exist. Polytheists, just extensions of pagans, would not exist. And then Jews and Christians would be like brothers of the book. I forget the exact term, but it's basically like
You can convert to Judaism in certain cases, yes.
they
Not all
believe some weird
sects.
shit, but they still come from Abraham, and therefore they're in a protected status. And
Right.
that's why Israel, from bin Laden's perspective, it can't stand because it does not defer itself to the spiritual authority of Islam.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. It's a hard thing. This is where just my own limitations, I'm so pragmatically minded that I can't prove a religious belief either true or false, right? Like I can only evaluate this stuff through where the public policy implications. So it's hard to know where to go with this. Like I appreciate him explaining his thoughts. That doesn't mean you get like whatever public policy you want based on your religion. So there it is.
Well, then this is kind of the dualism of Islam. I know we have more content to get through, so we'll keep
Sure.
it moving. But the dualism of Islam is that, especially early in the Quran, Muhammad says that like only God knows the fate of souls, and if a person is worshiping a religion, then
Well, this is fascinating. Didn't Baal become an ancient? No, Baal. The final Baal died in Stargate Continuum.
you let them do their thing, because basically it's already been ordained by God who's going to heaven and who's going to hell. Therefore, if somebody believes something different, leave them alone, basically. But in the second half of the Quran, he's at war, and so the verses get a little bit more spicy. They get a little bit less tolerant. And so as a result, the Quran can be interpreted either way, like giga tolerant or giga, I'll just say spicy to keep it nice.
I guess you know what this reminds me of is Warhammer. Like,
Yeah.
Don't do it. Don't do it.
Yeah.
it
Maybe
does a little bit. So
maybe the God Emperor of Mankind is correct. Maybe I was thinking this the other day. It's like I believe in like a deist version of God, but maybe the God Emperor is correct. Maybe humanity is too primitive to have like dogma.
yeah.
But
All right, part 3. Here's where we get to the public policy of what bin Laden actually wants. So I can bite into this one.
All right. The blood pouring out of Palestine must be equally revenged. You must know that the Palestinians do not cry alone. Their women are not widowed alone. Their sons are not orphaned alone. Do you want me to keep going?
Keep going.
You attacked us in Somalia. You supported the Russian atrocities against us in Chechnya, the Indian oppression against us in Kashmir, and the Jewish aggression against us in Lebanon. C. Under your supervision, consent, and orders, the governments of our countries, which act as your agents, attack us on a daily basis. I don't know why it goes to I. Oh, this is a subsect. These governments prevent our people from establishing the Islamic Sharia using violence and lies to do so. Subsection 2, these governments give us a taste of humiliation and place us in a large prison of fear and subdual. Subsection 3, these governments steal our Ummah's wealth and sell them to you at a paltry price. Subsection 4, these governments have surrendered to the Jews and handed them most of Palestine, acknowledging the existence of their state over the dismembered limbs of their own people. Subsection 5, the removal of these governments is an obligation upon us and a necessary step to free the Ummah and to make the Sharia the supreme law and to regain Palestine, and our fight against these governments is not separate from our fight against you.
A lot to bite into here. I mean,
I'm going to pause there.
So
Okay, this is A, not policy, and B, Brianna's not about to describe policy, but let's see.
okay, so you have some, I'm not going to say legitimate from everyone's point of view, but at least I can understand where if he's talking about like our policy,
What is this, Brooks? This is the next circle of hell that we have descended into.
some of our engagement in what are the places he mentions here: Somalia, Chechnya, Kashmir, Lebanon. I can understand how the populations in those places did not particularly enjoy the United States involvement there. And I think, Connor, both you and I would agree that there is a long list of poor foreign policy decisions that the United States government has embarked in under my lifetime. And there is some truth here to the colonialism aspect of this and securing resources in other countries and plundering them.
We went to Somalia to feed people, to give them food. And then people took that food and they used it to kill people, to starve them, to control them. So we went to kill the guy who was doing that. Lebanon, I've said previously that the Lebanese civil war is entirely too complicated to watch, to view, or to talk about, and that if anyone actually understands the Lebanese civil war in its entirety, it'll instantly restart in a new and more terrifyingly complex format.
There's some truth there. I'm not going to deny that. I think where it's really hard, and where any progressive agreeing with this should really have their head examined, look at the policy proposal he's giving to you. The removal of these governments is an obligation among us. It's a necessary step to basically create the...
That's not a policy proposal. That's a piece of propaganda. We want to get rid of the government of Israel. Okay. Well, SMART goals, star, tar, situation, task, action, resolution. I don't know, anything. Just once in your life, actually talk about policy and mean policy and not try to boil propaganda down to policy.
The world that they want. So they want to topple every single one of these governments and allies themselves with the United States. And this is something I really think is under discussed with this whole thing. Even with the Ukraine war, this is super, super under discussed. People don't appreciate just how much the United States is used as a scapegoat by corrupt governments all around the world as an excuse for their own failures. This is Putin's number one go-to move that he has done for the longest time. If his economy sucks, it's America's fault, right? If their military sucks, it's America's fault. So it's one of these things where two things are true at once. Like our foreign policy has often not been to the benefit of the people on the other end of that foreign policy. At the same point, like, we've been scapegoated in a way that is sometimes out of proportion to the issues at hand, and the policy proposal he's proposing here is just completely untenable.
Yeah, and I
not propose a policy.
think I have a couple of memes popping in my head. One of them is...
Do you just think in memes? Is that the problem? Is that the only thing that happens? Is like images of dodge, and this is fine, just roll through your mind all the time? Is that the issue?
I tweeted this a few times. Unfortunately, it didn't go viral. All those TikToks were coming out saying that, like, oh, I understand Bin Laden now, so I get it. And there's Jake Peralta from the cop series Brooklyn Nine-Nine, and he's like, cool motive, still murder.
Our foreign policy absolutely has benefited the U.S., Gent.
And that's how that's how I feel about
exactly.
it.
It's like,
you have like a huge geopolitical reasoning for why you're pissed off, and that's understandable. But then your solution is to kill a few thousand people, cause billions of dollars of damage, and cause an international holy war that doesn't cost, by the way, I think the global war on terror cost the United States like 20,000 American lives between the two theaters. It cost us like another 10,000 to 30,000 like civilian contractors of various nations. It cost us like $2 or $3 trillion. But the actual human cost was in the Ummah. It was in the Muslim population. Between
exactly right.
500,000 and 1.5 million people. And what's interesting is he highlights the worldview of ISIS. This is, 10 years before ISIS, but he highlights the worldview where the Muslim rulers of Muslim countries are puppets of Israel and puppets of the United States. And so the war is not just with the United States, it's also with Saudi Arabia. It's also with, Lebanon. It's also with like all.
This is not really like, this is the propaganda point that Al-Qaeda believes. They don't think it's puppets. They recognize, for example, like the Gulf War. Osama bin Laden watches the United States come riding to the rescue of Kuwait and Saudi Arabia. Like, he understands that in order to accomplish his goals, the first thing he has to do is to be able to take down Muslim governments around Saudi Arabia, Oman, all these different countries, right? But he can't do that so long as there's the specter of American intervention coming. So the idea is to delegitimize the concept of Saudi Arabia and the royal family itself by painting them as American puppets. He doesn't actually think they're American puppets. He understands the relationship between them. But if you're a puppet, you're not the master of your own fate, right? So if you paint someone as a puppet, someone is merely you've taken away their agency for one, and they become complicit in anything you want to paint to the puppet master. And the other thing you'd end up doing is you make it acceptable. You make it acceptable to fight them, because a puppet's not a person, right? At the end of the day, it's a puppet. You've dehumanized an entire set of people and a concept, and you've because your idea is to paint your pan-Muslimist state as the only legitimate concept.
Anybody who doesn't support a jihadist, you are also the enemy.
Like you have to not read this damn thing literally.
And so that's the rub, kind of, is people ask like, well, all the hijackers were Saudi, so why didn't we invade Saudi Arabia? And it's because we are, relatively speaking, boys with the Saudi government, and this was a rebel from Saudi Arabia.
Wait, being allied with the Saudi government has nothing to do with why we didn't invade Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia did not attack us on 9/11. Al-Qaeda attacked us on 9/11. And from the base from which they operated from was in Afghanistan. I'm okay. Let's continue.
Who wants to kill the Saudi government as much as he wants to kill the United States.
That's exactly right. That's dead on.
Yeah. And that's where I really hate like baby's first hot take, you know, like libertarians who are like in Massachusetts or whatever. And they're like,
me too. Remind me to dislike this video.
Did you know that 17 of the 21 hijackers weren't even Afghan, or they weren't even Afghan or Iraq? They were Saudi Arabia. Why didn't we invade Saudi Arabia? Oil, bro. And it's like, yeah, like oil, but also like they were rebels in their own country, so destroying an ally would have no positive effect, you fucking dunce. Excuse my French.
Exactly. All right, let's get through
Lowest common possible denominator here.
this letter. We got other topics to get through.
Of course. So
I think we're at D.
Yeah, you steal our wealth. Yeah, you steal our wealth and oil at paltry prices because of your international influences and military threats. The theft is indeed the biggest theft ever witnessed by mankind in the history of the world. I think that's bullshit.
I do too.
They're giga wealthy. And also, real quick aside.
Yeah, they're selling it. This is why they're so wealthy. Their governments have done very well, actually. So.
Well, and not just that, but if you look at the household poverty rate and unmarried rate of Saudi Arabia in like 1992, it was horrible. I think like the male unemployment rate was like 40%. And immediately after the 9/11 tax, like 9/11 tax, 2 or 3 years, the Saudi government.
Saudi Arabia is a country in the sense that it is on a map and it has a government, but Saudi Arabia also has an awful lot of dissidents. America's next big war is probably not China. It's probably going to be in Saudi Arabia because it collapses in and on itself.
It was like, oh, we have 40% male unemployment and we're radicalizing jihadists. If we're not going to have international jihadists take over the entire world, then we need to fix that. And so as a result, I think they got male unemployment under 10%, which I get is like still not great, but that's a lot better than 40. Let's be real. So that's something I Googled like 10 years ago. So somebody correct me if I'm wrong. But moving on. E, your forces occupy our countries and you spread your military bases throughout them. You corrupt our lands and you besiege our sanctities to protect the security of the Jews and to ensure the continuity of the pillage of our treasures. You have starved the Muslims of Iraq, where children die every day. It is a wonder that more than 1.5 million Iraqi children have died.
Yeah, he's referring to the sanctions in Iraq, and yeah, that's true. The sanctions affected the civilian population immensely. KSA claims 5% unemployment. That's because they're lying. Yeah, no, Saudi Arabia is not a vacation spot, guys. Just don't go. No reason to be in Saudi Arabia.
As a result of your sanctions.
Everything there sucks.
And you did not show concern. Yet when 3,000 of your people died, the entire world rises and has not yet sat down. Saddam's an asshole.
This is before Iraq War II, which was an atrocity. Those sanctions were there to try to control Saddam Hussein, who had invaded Kuwait for oil. So, I don't disagree with you that like the sanctions were mostly targeted at it did hurt the civilian population, but like there's a throughput here of the governments like they're failing their people and the United States being blamed for it, right? Like the United States is not having those sanctions against Iraq before the first Iraq War because we want to starve those children. It's because Saddam Hussein was a threat to, geostability. So, right, like I hear what he's saying, but it just you're leaving out some very important context in my view.
Well, and we also have like moral and philosophical and technical and tactical evolution over time. So I think part of the reason why targeted sanctions in the tens, particularly when it came to targeting Russian oligarchs, the reason why that exists is probably because of the international backlash against the sanctions in Iraq, where they were like, why are you punishing civilians? They have the least power possible. So why don't you target the rich oligarchical assholes who are ransacking the wealth of their countries? And then you'll have more international support and more public support from the people within those countries. Of course, we can't tell, what's more effective, but it's probably less dead kids. So, that's good, I guess. Moving on, you have supported the Jews in their idea that Jerusalem is their eternal capital and agreed to move your embassy there. With your help and under your protection, the Israelis are planning to destroy the Al-Aqsa Mosque. Under the protection of your weapons, Sharon entered the Al-Aqsa Mosque to pollute it as a preparation to capture and destroy it. I'm going to keep going from there because that's just still Israel bad. 2, these tragedies and calamities are only a few examples of your oppression and aggression against us. It is commanded by our religion and intellect that the oppressed have a right to return that aggression. So do not await anything from us but jihad or holy struggle, resistance and revenge. Is it in any way rational to expect that after America has attacked us for more than half a century, that we will then leave her to live in security and peace? ! 3, you may then dispute that all of the above does not justify aggression against civilians for crimes they did not commit and offenses which they did not participate. Interesting. He's anticipating the argument. A, the argument contradicts your continuous repetition that America is the land of freedom and its leaders in this world. Therefore, the American people are the ones who choose the government by the way of their own free will, a choice which stems from their agreement to its policies. Thus, the American people have chosen, consented to, and affirmed their support for the Israeli oppression of the Palestinians, the occupation and usurpation of their land, and its continuous killing.
I hate to channel President Sunday here, but no, the consent is by tacitly, you can tacitly consent by living here. The voting's just bonus. But I would point out that this is a fairly ridiculous argument on its face. But it's also nearly as ridiculous as an Israeli supporter arguing that all Gazans are supporters of Hamas. Tacitly.
Torture, punishment, and expulsion of the Palestinians. The American people have the ability and choice to refuse the policies of their government and even to change it if they want. B, I'm just going to get through this part. B, the American people are the ones who pay the taxes which fund the planes that bomb us in Afghanistan, the tanks that strike and destroy our homes in Palestine, the armies which occupy our lands in the Arabian Gulf, and the fleets which ensure the blockade of Iraq. These tax dollars are given to Israel for it to continue to attack us and penetrate our land. So the American people are the ones who fund the attacks against us, and they are the ones who oversee the expenditure of these monies in the way that they wish through their elected candidates. C, also the American army is part of the American people. It is this very same people who are shamelessly helping the Jews fight against us. D, the American people are the ones who empty both their men and their women in the American armed forces which attack us. E, this is why the American people cannot be innocent of all the crimes committed by the Americans and Jews against us. I'll stop there. That seems like a reasonable place.
Well, okay, so overall, like endorsing, collective punishment, which I thought was a lot of the complaint that's currently going on with Palestine. But I think this is where I want to really be honest and say my knowledge of,
If you were honest, I would be amazed.
like, Israeli Palestine, like foreign policy really picks up when Netanyahu got in charge. What was it, 16 years ago?
Wait a second. Your only understanding of Israel begins when Netanyahu comes into office? Holy shit. You have been alive for some of the most consequential moments in the conflict between the Arab world and Israel, and you haven't been paying any fucking attention since Benjamin Netanyahu came into office? That explains your fucking brain dead takes. Holy crap. Like you just got here like 6 seconds ago. Holy shit. That's... Oh, I gotta take a second. Oh, holy my God. Okay, it's okay. Yeah, but it wasn't like Trent Lawton Bush were aware of Afghan or Iraq, Israel. Jesus.
Because that has been in the news, his far-right policies, the escalation of violence and the abuse of the Palestinians,
Ariel Sharon was no saint, just saying.
which is why I'm really opposed to it. I think I would probably need to read up more about what the what the history is like with Israel and Palestine in this era to have a really, really good understanding.
It was 20 years ago. It was 20 years ago.
Of this, but I just obviously don't agree that you can come like strike American cities because you feel entitled to.
Okay, let me sort of put this. If you want to get the most milquetoast liberal take possible on Israel and Palestine, and like there is a arc at the beginning of season 6 of The West Wing, end of season 5, beginning of season 6, that they basically do Oslo on the show. So like they hammer out a peace agree. No, I'm okay. I'm not smelling burnt toast. I had a moment, but we're back. They hammer out Oslo basically on the West Wing. It talks about in some detail throughout the course of the 3 episodes or so that they spend at Camp David. It starts like the episode NSF Thermont. They talk about the principal points behind it without going too much into the history of it. So like a fast primer, go watch that. Then go sit and read well, Sunday's got me on 2 books right now. The first is Rise and Kill First, and the second is 100 Years of by Rashid Talibi. Read that because I'm thumbing through it and it's got a lot of stuff on the peace process in there, and kind of like the caveats to the peace process. Whatever you do, don't watch Brianna Wu and a Wick stream to learn about Israel. Yes, the Gaza episode is horrible, Jemt, but also it's reflective of the attitudes of Israelis. I've been having like moderate chats with that Katie about this because she is an Israeli and a couple other people. Like I've reached out to her on Twitter and talked about some of this stuff. Um, there are a lot of really dark attitudes in Israel, to put it mildly. It's not a happy place. It looks very postcardy sometimes. It's not a happy place.
A land that you consider holy, and you want to wipe Israel off the map.
Yeah, and that's one of the things where somebody was pointing out the irony of being like, oh, the jihadists think attacking civilians is based, so what's your objection to, Israel doing what it's doing? And so it's like, oh, okay, so you indiscriminately slaughter people, so what's the beef?
That's again, want to be very careful.
Tit for tat, eye for an eye, right?
Palestinian people are not bin Laden, and we should not conflate that. But this same mindset kind of just...
Thank you for that. No, we know that.
Justifies what...
You cannot pretend that this conversation exists at the edges of what's acceptable. There are many people who aren't ever being heard who have really measured and informed takes. These are not those people.
Israel is doing right now, which I don't support, to be clear, but if that's the rules you want to agree to, there it is.
We should find somebody there's going to be somebody who kind of bites down on this, but they can't bite down on it fully because it's not popular in the liberal Western world.
Okay, those are not the rules that you've agreed to. Israel's acting in contravention of the rules of war, and they're doing it because they know no one is going to be able to stop them. Israel is the boogeyman that the Arab states check under their beds for.
But I think I tweeted, consequentialism and its consequences have been a disaster for the human race. And what I mean by that is Vaush, love him dearly, but Vaush has talked about how...
I don't think you do.
How the impacts of, the results are the same, therefore things can be morally equivalent. And this logic has been extended by leftoids, by progressives, to terrorism. And so when they say, oh, well, if you get somebody and you strap a bomb to them and they walk into a public area and they suicide bomb and they kill 30 civilians, or if you're a drone and then you fire a Hellfire missile at a terrorist target and then it kills 30 civilians, that's the same thing. And for me, one of the important moral distinctions is that, I could get into more detail, but the intent of a suicide bombing is to inflict terror on the civilian population, to get everybody to bow down, to get them to be so scared of the terrorists that they basically concede military and political control to the terrorists. Whereas the intent of a Hellfire...
Maybe I don't get out enough, but I've never actually met anyone who thinks this.
Missile killing a terrorist is in order to prevent a massacre of civilians.
The only time I've ever been accused of being a consequentialist is when I was in that WIC debate with Fabian Liberty, who started using the term because he didn't know what it meant, to just talk and speak incoherently so that no one can come up with a counter argument because what he said was so fucking incoherent. I've never met a person who believes this.
So yes, there's collateral damage, but basically, what do you just want to let?
Yes, that's the whole point of the Dahiyat doctrine. Is Israel bombs the crap out of people and terrorizes them and starves them and kills them, so that they can end terrorism. It's not worked out well so far. They don't know about meta ethics.
The terrorist operate unhindered because he hides amongst civilians. And then that gets into arguments about well, why don't we send in special forces in order to reduce casualties? And then it's okay, well, now we're invading the holy Muslim lands with boots on the ground, and that carries its own...
Come on, man. You should know better. Special forces isn't boots on the ground. There's a very specific meaning to that. To be fair, in terms of talking about efficaciousness, multiple commentators and analysts objected to Obama's use of drones on the grounds that you could have secured these individuals for special operations and extracted intelligence out of them. This gets into the larger debate about means and ends and what the line between guerrilla fighters and terrorists is, right? Because I don't necessarily see a clear one. For example, go back to Vietnam and start reading about the NVA and the VC and their own atrocities against civilians. They burned villages multiple times. That's just the beginning of it. These aren't black and white like distinctions. The way we want to paint them. Terrorism is ultimately a crime, right? But it's a pejorative too. We use the word terrorist to discredit someone's actions. So like I think there's a discussion to be had, but I don't think it's being had here. That you talk about like, what's the line? Like at what line does someone cross? So yeah, that's silly.
Own host of risks and costs. So yeah, so don't kill civilians. Killing civilians is bad. That's my takeaway.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Wow. Brave. Stunning and brave. So let's continue.
Let's finish.
Yeah. So if you want to finish, we can finish because I think we're about halfway, I guess. But
yeah, 30 minutes. Yeah. Why don't we call it there? Unless you think it'd be a good segment to like clip all of this out, like we go through the entire letter. I think that would be a pretty good thing to drop on YouTube.
I think so. And also the other ones, I still think this is going to be hot in a week. Maybe not like the Willie Max debate and all that kind of stuff, but I don't think the anti-Semitism that we've seen over the past 3 weeks is going anywhere. So
yeah,
if there,
let's
so
finish
if
it on up.
Yeah, if there's a hotter topic next week, we can do the hotter topic. But right wing,
maybe we'll
left wing,
find some more time this week and jump on and finish the rest of our topics for this week because I don't think 2 hours is going to be enough for our show.
Well, yeah, let's dial it in. That's of course the whole point of the inaugural episode. Cannot be innocent. Okay, so here we go. So F, and this is wrapping up.
That's why I do show notes when I have guests.
Question 1. Allah the Almighty legislated the permission and the option to take revenge. Thus, if we are attacked, then we have the right to attack back. Whoever has destroyed our villages and towns, then we have the right to destroy their villages.
Which I agree with.
If Sharon is a man of peace in the eyes of Bush, then we are also men of peace. America does not understand the language. Because it would go back to Israel is a crime, its establishment is a crime, its expansion is a crime, and therefore the slow rolling expansion of Israel is just as violent as jihadist terrorism. It's just more civilized. Therefore, Westerners don't care about it.
They've done bad things. That makes whatever we do good. That's the way I read this.
Well, and that's literally what he's arguing for. He's literally arguing for eye for an eye, and he says that in the Quran, eye for an eye is ordained by God.
America does not understand the language of manners and principles, so we are addressing it the language it understands. So basically, we are subhuman, and violence against us is justified.
Well, what I would say, if I was to steel man a jihad, understand the language of manners and principles, so we are addressing it using the language it understands. So for me, he's saying that the United States of America does not understand manners and principles. So he's saying that we're unprincipled.
No, what he's saying is, in no uncertain terms, is he's saying is, you have visited violence upon us, therefore we feel justified in visiting violence upon you. Everything else is this propaganda. Strip that away. Like, this is what is being saying. He is saying tit for tat. This does not need to be complex. It doesn't need to be read as he thinks we're subhuman. What it needs to be read as is, we shall do unto you what you have done unto us. Basic, very simple, Flowery because it's propaganda, but simple.
Old a-holes. And so since we don't understand diplomacy, manners, and principles, then they're going to speak to us in the language of violence, since that's a language we understand.
I've often, sometimes as I've gotten to know people like all around the world, sometimes when I am talking to, people that are devout Muslims and they're not American, for me, as like, an American feminist, generally I'm going into a situation like talking to a dude, like with respect, obviously, but I don't necessarily assume like he's above me, right? Like I talk to you like you're my friend, you're my equal, like with respect, right? And I sometimes get the sense that there's a like literally a patriarchal kind of assumption that's baked into that. That is kind of it's interesting to try and navigate sometimes.
What the hell
so
is the
when
point?
I read this, I'm wondering if that's what he means by we don't understand manners. Like there's a kind of social hierarchy that's based into there that maybe we just don't have the language to figure out how to navigate.
No. Fuck.
Potentially,
Jesus.
I like my interpretation. If
So maybe I think that's probably what he's getting at here. Like the United States doesn't understand manners, meaning
Why? No. Jesus. Holy fuck. This is why you get educated, so that you can go and do this kind of shit. And then you do this kind of shit in an undergraduate paper, and like, yeah, you do a 5-paragraph argument about this, that bin Laden is talking about, like, in his letter, blah 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 blah, and then a professor tells you no. Not enough professors have told her no. Stop talking, please, dear God. Maybe there were. She did go to school for like 10 years and never got a degree. But like, holy shit. Oh my God. Sometimes the cigar is just a cigar.
These protocols that they have that are very important for like the stability of the society. And then once that's
from the Muslim
Oh God, she's just a fucking conservative at this point, isn't she? Jesus Christ.
world, here I go collectivizing, a few billion people. But I don't think it's a reasonable ask to ask people outside of the faith to totally bow down to you or else we're going to kill you. I don't think that's a reasonable ask.
No,
but what I do think is a reasonable ask is saying like, hey, you guys have a totally different conception on sanctity and belief and reverence and religion and all that kind of stuff. And I would really appreciate it if you didn't go out of your way to antagonize us and appealing to people's like sense of humanity and reciprocity. And I think that there's always going to be a transgressive part of the American spirit just because the First Amendment exists. But I think that we would see less violence if we approach each other as human beings and try to be reciprocal.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I mean, like if I went to Kuwait, I would obviously wear a head covering just to be polite and follow, like, the norms of that particular.
No, you'd wear a head covering in Kuwait because that's the law.
Society, right? That's just like not being an a-hole, right? But their objection here is not the way we necessarily communicate with them. It's our entire country, right?
Yeah.
So that's probably. I feel like we've gone really long on this one passage.
Oh my God in Himmel. No, they don't hate us for our freedoms. It's okay. It's okay. We're okay. No one's dead.
Sure.
But, it's. I think this is a insurmountable communication problem that we've honed in on here.
Well, and the good news is we can move on to question 2. Of course, I wanted to see how much was left, so I scrolled too aggressively. But here we go. So, as for the second question that we want to answer, what are we calling you to, and what do we want from you? The first thing is that we're calling you to Islam. Great.
Okay.
All right.
Good luck.
No, thank you.
Yeah, the religion of the unification of God, of freedom from associating partners with him, and rejection of this complete love of him, the exalted of complete submission to his laws, and the discarding of all the opinions, orders, theories, and religions which contradict. Oh, he's the emperor of mankind. That's interesting. Which
Something on the order of 4 Muslim countries have had women leaders.
contradict with the religion he sent down to his prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. Islam is the religion of all the prophets and makes no distinction between them, peace be upon them all. Interesting. If we did all convert, then there would be less conflict. That's an interesting appeal.
Okay.
It is.
Yeah. All we gotta do is destroy the Constitution, Connor, and
eliminate
become
liberalism,
yeah.
secularism, become a theocracy. You know,
We're good to go.
Don't
Come
permit
on.
Hinduism or atheism or agnosticism. If we all convert, no problems. Okay, got it. So it is.
See ya, Brooks. I'm getting a hint of Orientalism here. No, yo, it's not a hint. It's a full-on. It's a full-on dose. Good strong dose. You can have perfectly functional conversations with Muslims all the time. Assam, great guy at the cathedral if you catch him.
It is to this religion that we call you, the seal of all the previous religious. It is the religion. Oh wait, hold on. Did I do this? It is the religion of unification of God, sincerity, the best of manners, righteousness, mercy, honor, purity, and piety. It is a religion of showing kindness to others, establishing justice. Bring a book like the Quran or even 10 self-referenced dozens of times throughout the Quran, and it was argued that the continuity and coherence of the belief system was in and of itself evidence of divine revelation, and that the contradictions in other religions were evidence that they were not revealed by God. And so if you could
liberal fantasy of there being a secular democracy, like in place of Jerusalem, with this being like a dual state.
All right, this isn't going to get any better. What is it? Yeah, it's 10 o'clock. This isn't going to get much better. Oh, all right. Let's wrap this up. Long story short, this is going to be a nightmare. The power hour of racism is let's see, what have we got on the plate for us here at Two Guys Talking History? We have this week, we're going to be doing the second men's mental health episode. Probably maybe Monday. I have to talk to Hetman. We're going to put together some more stuff in Ukraine this week, and I am in the middle of writing a video essay covering the discussion between the one-state solution and two-state solution individuals on the Israel-Palestine question. The working title of this video essay is One State, Two State, Arab State, Jew State, because something's wrong with me, obviously. Go ahead and keep an eye out for all of that. We appreciate everyone showing up tonight and sticking around. I appreciate Sunday for the raid. Thank you, everybody, and have a good night.